wonderful and distinguished panel. Just thinking about this morning about the fact that in the 19th century, I'm a historian and archivist, so these are the kind of things I think about. In the 19th century, doctors and administrators, it was the era of asylum building, you see, throughout Europe and North America. And as a preliminary to this, very often city authorities would send doctors or administrators on a European tour to see the hospitals that are already operating, look at their environment as a preliminary to start to decide how they're going to design their hospital. And Dave, I guess, has done a similar 21st century version of that, and the story of that is told in the exhibition outside. But it's great to have as conversation partners today Philip Ross and Lydia Towsey. Each have different perspectives on that same subject matter, which they're going to introduce today. And I'm sure it's going to be a very engaging discussion. And I hope you all get a chance to engage as well. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Lydia. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Colin Gale, thank you very much. That came across a little accusatory, didn't it, from me? He looked back like, what did I do? Colin Gale! So in a nice way. So I'm Lydia. Welcome, Lydia Towsey. We'll do introductions properly in a moment. But welcome to Delusions of Grandeur, an In Conversation event with Philip Ross and David Parkin, and chaired by myself, Lydia Towsey. To sort of say a bit more about who is in the room, at least up here first, talking. Philip Ross, first of all, is the chair of Design in Mental Health, a network that aims to transform mental health environments and improve patient recovery. You are also a director of SHP. Now, what does that stand for?
Safe Inch Primera. We make doors that reduce the risk of self-harm and blah, blah, blah.
Okay,
so
right, okay.
I come from a product design background, which is how I got caught up in all of the world of design.
Okay, so we'll get to some of those questions about how you got into this area in a moment as well. But that's good background. So doors was the starting point in a way. And you make specialising in doors. How metaphorical and symbolic.
They are.
Aldous Huxley-like.
Yes.
Perception. So you co-founded this company, SHP, in 2007 alongside your colleague Martin Izzard with the purpose of improving people's lives through good design. And today that passion runs through your entire team. 40, that's a lot of people.
It's actually grown to 60, so
60?
It's even bigger. Yeah.
Gosh,
it's
that's
kind of
like, that's like bigger than Lush or something.
Possibly. Similar size.
I don't know why I have to pick that particular, I'm not employed by them, or like bigger than Lush, oh my god, I can't handle that, you know. Obviously, my bath products, some of them come from. And you continue with your team to develop products that not only improve lives, but also save them.
Yes.
So it's exciting, important, imperative stuff, and it's wonderful that you're with us to talk about, I suppose, mental health prevention from a design point of view, which is a whole different angle to consider, really. So thank you, Philip. Thank you, yes. David Parkin, to give you your James Bond introduction, is an artist, author, theatre maker, musician, and installation artist. Your work is fiercely autobiographical or silly and speculative. I'm not saying it's silly, this is the professional patter, this is good stuff. But always thoughtful, moving and funny, from your children's book and musical, The Nose That Nobody Picked, which is for sale downstairs in the gift shop. Always gotta love a gift shop, haven't you? Exit through it. To his clinical depression concept album show, Good Friday, which is showing here.
It's here on the 22nd of July at 6 o'clock.
22nd. I'll try and remember to mention that again at the end. So yeah, really good. And I've seen it and it's wonderful, so I can definitely confirm that. In 2015, you had a bipolar manic episode. You were sectioned for 4 months. And Dave Parkin's Delusions of Grandeur is an installation that examines your experience through a cacophony of mediums and looks at that time in your life. So you've got your installation and you've also got a book, Delusions of Grandeur, that accompanies it, that the text boards are lifted from. And it's really exploring that whole period of mental health detention. And it's in residence here, it's 22nd, isn't it, of July. And to tell you who I am, I'm Lydia Towsey. I'm a writer and performer and the author of 2 full-length poetry collections, The Venus Papers and The English Disease, both published by Burning Eye Books, As well as being an artist, I'm also the co-director of Leicestershire Partnership NHS Trust's Arts in Mental Health Service, that to our knowledge is nationally unique, and the director of two organisations, Bright Sparks, Arts in Mental Health Charity, which I co-direct with my colleague at the NHS, Tim Sayers, and Word, which is a poetry organisation delivering one of the longest running poetry nights in the UK, which is also uniquely co-produced by an NHS trust. And I have also made work drawing on my own mental health experiences, and am an expert by experience in that regard, and that's something I bring to my work at the NHS and my work as a writer and performer. And we'll perhaps get into some of that as we continue. So as we continue, first things first, Dave, tell us about Delusions of Grandeur. Give us an overall picture, what's it all about?
Can everyone hear us at the back?
Oh, yes. Can you hear? Yeah.
Okay, cool. I thought I saw some people straining there.
We'll try and raise our voices as much as we can. I know not everyone at the back will be able to. If some of you can and some of you can't, that might be a thing too. But yeah.
Yeah, so Delusions, which some of you hopefully may have seen, is about sectioning. Although this is boiling it down, but it's about sectioning, and it's also about the strangeness, the wonder and the horror of a bipolar manic episode. Rather than talking about the text boards, which run all the way around, you've got to do them in the right order, which is this way, from sectioning to getting released. I'll talk about the sound elements in there, just because we're going to be talking about the text boards in a bit, and how the sound elements sort of represent, I guess, what the show is about. Mm-hmm. So you can at some point, it's an awful listen, it makes my toes curl, but you can listen to songs I wrote and recorded in there. Now I was just learning the guitar, I play the piano, but I was just learning the guitar, and I was drugged off my face. And so the songs aren't particularly good. No, I've played them live since, and one or two of them are not bad, actually. And so I'm kind of like this, and then you can hear people screaming in the background. And I recorded these. You weren't supposed to record them, but I did that illegally. So I guess that's a good example of I'm trying to present a very unflinching kind of look at sectioning and what it was like. Yes. And also, where am I? Section 1. Mm-hmm. So I've written notes for my first answer, but you can listen to interviews with my friends and family, and I suppose I've tried to attack it from a number of mediums, but that gives you a view of what sectioning is like to support someone. Putting someone up for section must be something my mum had to do, must be, it's a horrific thing to go through. And so that gives that view. And then I guess talking about the bipolar side of it, there is a last room where you can listen to audio. And when I crashed, when I finally got depressed, I wrote Long Stream of Consciousness in a big black book. I'm so glad it was black, looking back. But I wrote Stream of Consciousness just to kind of keep me going. And it's quite hopeful, it's a bit nonsensical, and it's quite sad in places, but it's someone trying to find meaning, really, or trying to find a reason to go on. So I guess that last audio bit, and I will touch very briefly upon how I'm poking at the NHS, because in there's my seclusion room. So when I got sectioned, I got put in seclusion twice, and I decided it was horrific. So I took to my mad little notebook, which is also on display, and I wrote up my alternative vision of seclusion that would have clouds, and the nice thing was, like a year or so later, I thought, I'm going to make this, and so I made it. So I guess that represents how the work is kind of poking at the NHS and what I think is wrong with sectioning in 2015. Yes. So I guess also, I think sectioning is possibly one of the last society's last taboos. I mean, there are other things, but they're far too sexual and weird to deal with. But no one really talks about sectioning. And when I did this in Leicester, people would come up and go, "Oh yeah, I've been there," and I knew these people, and so yeah, it's about that. That was a very long answer.
No,
They're
it's
not
a good
all that
answer.
long.
No, not at all. I mean, because it highlights a number of the subjects we're going to go into in more detail as we go forward. And it is such an immersive experience, isn't it? I think that's the word. I mean, it's 360 degrees. You stand in the middle of that gallery. There's something around, you're surrounded and encased in the memory of this time. And it's multi-sensory, as you highlight, the sound and the visual and the physicality of it. You can go and lie down in seclusion, or as seclusion would be if you had your way, Dave, and that may be as it should be, which we'll get to.
Well, you could lie down in seclusion,
Yeah.
but the bed was just a wipe. It was just a mat. It wasn't comfy.
No. So very different to that, but we will return to that subject. Thank you. Turning to you, Phil. May I call you Phil?
Phil is fine, yes.
What, at the risk of sounding like Mrs. Merton, first attracted you to the area, to working in the area of designing mental health units?
So to kind of rewind the clock a little bit, I studied product design, so I've always been interested in that kind of creative process to making things better.
Right.
And then it was, I originally designed a door hinge you can't trap your fingers in whilst I was studying product design, and launched a business for that. And it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years into the business, and one of our friends that we studied with was sectioned.
Right.
And this was in a hospital in Falkirk, brand new facility. And the experience I felt as a visitor was pretty traumatic.
Right.
You walk down this kind of incredibly long corridor, it felt like a mile long, almost feeling like I was in a film like The Shining or something. And then you're arriving at the very end, obviously the mental health unit's kept away from everybody else. And you're in this really distorted space mentally as you kind of come and see somebody that you've known throughout your life, to then see them in a really different space. He was very well drugged, to kind of give it that phrase. And we would go through this process every time we visited him. But when the visiting was happening, you were just basically sitting in his bedroom. And Andy was in there, he was sleep deprived when he went in. That was what prompted a manic episode. And yet he would sit there and tell us, look at that door. There's light leakage gaps all the way round. I can't sleep in here. So here's somebody who's prompted being sectioned by the fact he's sleep deprived. And the very space he's meant to get better in was actually making it really difficult to do the basics such as sleeping. And our common topic of discussion was product design. So we would, in the visiting time, well, what can we design better? What can we do differently? And it just prompted this conversation. You just start looking around these rooms and think, why is design not being considered here?
Yeah.
Why are designers not involved in these spaces? And why are people not pushing for something better? And that's really where the kind of penny dropped for us was, number one, mental healthcare spaces were not suitable for the purpose that they were being used for. Number two, there was more work needed to be done on the design, not just of the built environment, but the products that get used within them. And I suppose that kind of prompted us to think, well, is this an opportunity for us to maybe navigate and pivot our business into this sort of greater focus on mental health? Because it was just something we always cared about, was creating a business where it wasn't just product design for product design's sake, but design that was for some better purpose.
Yeah.
And that was kind of I suppose, our journey in. And we started off by taking the original door hinge and making it more suited for mental health environments, but then things just spiraled, and I think after about 2 or 3 years of being involved in mental health design, I joined the board of Design and Mental Health Network, which is a group of people wanting to improve the environment. And then about 18 months ago I took on the chair role. So.
And it all stems from this lived experience that you have had by proxy, but you have been involved with, and observed directly.
Yeah, and I think if I'm being honest, probably also arced back to my own personal experience of feeling vulnerable at certain points in my
I
life.
was just thinking of that word, I don't know about you, you know, sort of the vulnerability that we all have, actually, if we can connect to that and then empathise.
Yeah, and I think that's where you can really, it's probably the one element I still feel we're lacking at times, is real, genuine empathy in understanding the design choices from the people who will experience them. And that's why, again, Dave, the work you're doing with your book is really, really powerful, really important, because it's through moments like this that people who are involved in design, involved in the construction of these healthcare environments, can actually really start to get a better picture of what it feels like when you're on the other side of those design decisions.
Well, having a picture at all, because it's such a hidden world normally, isn't it? And a taboo subject, but it does literally lift the curtain, you know, as you open that room seclusion curtain you have through there, and metaphorically and literally. But, I mean, this is all wonderful. I mean, and I know that, you know, you were talking about cutting-edge approaches to design in mental health, and you're the chair of the board leading this forward. But, yeah, there is probably a disparity between the ideal and the actual. What, in an ideal world, does a contemporary mental health care facility look like? Because I'm imagining you are leading the way in the next frontier on that front, you know, on that side of things.
It's a really interesting question. So, modern mental health environments are very different from the asylums of the past. And, you know, thankfully, there's been major investment that's gone through recently for trying to eradicate dormitories, although I would add only in England, so there's still a lot more work to be done. But when you look at many mental health environments, they're still not fit for purpose. The truth is that we need to rebuild most of them, but that takes major investment, and it's whether the government balances out that major investment alongside physical health. So, you know, the mental health investment is not planned with Boris's billions for all these brand new shiny hospitals. It's actually not really being considered meaningfully until 2035. We're going to spend the next 15 years focusing on physical health. So, back to the question of what does a contemporary modern mental health environment look like, then number one, single bedrooms. There's not really any other factor to that. Communal space is a key priority. I think there's more work that needs to be done in how we actually make communal spaces conducive to recovery. There's too often you'll get one large common area for 20 people, and I remember how I was with my siblings, and there was only 3 of us. And so I know how we fought when there was 3 trying to control who watched what program.
Enough space, and you want breakout areas, I would imagine, within the communal space, so you can be private and together.
So this is a kind of topic that at Design Mental Health we're starting to kind of get the conversation going, so we can produce another design guide on this area. And then I suppose the other major part is outdoor spaces that actually kind of provide that access to nature, because there's so much evidence across the board about the importance of scenes of nature, being in nature as part of your mental well-being.
Yeah, well, those are 3 key elements there, you know, so the use of shared and private spaces, and indoor and out, of course. Okay. So, Dave, I know that you addressed the last Design in Mental Health conference, and was somewhat, I understand, taken aback by some of these innovations, and, you know, the latest ways of doing things. And now, of course, Philip has described, you know, the ideal setting for all of us. How does that tally with your experience of the undertaking?
It was awful, my experience.
Don't pull any punches then, you must say it exactly as you feel it. Don't
really honest.
Dress it up.
This was 2015, so I'm gonna, you know, I'm just gonna highlight some of the things which she said need seen to. So first things first, getting in and out of the place. As you said, like the mental health unit was tucked around the side like a dirty secret, and getting in and out of the thing, well, it was labyrinthine. You know, you'd have to buzz through doors and then go through the next doors. If you had a nurse with you, they had to do that, and you'd pass other wards. It's all together, and you'd get glimpses into these other wards, and you know, and occasionally you'd see something kicking off. So that would be really interesting, and then you'd wonder what was down that corridor. You felt like you were in the belly of the beast, and yeah, getting into the ward, it was really old and dilapidated. You know, kind of like an NHS waiting room, but with nicer chairs. And there were bays. You've talked about bays. Now, obviously we need to change this. I'll just explain why. Really highlight. So there's 6 beds to a room, like an army barracks almost. And so you're sleeping with six men. And sleep is obviously possibly 101 of recovering from a mental health crisis or getting through mental health. And so if someone on the bay is a snorer, you're screwed. So Omar, who I had in my second ward, he was actually, by comparison to the first guy, he was quite easy. He just disturbed, kept you up. But literally, this guy, I have no idea. We did have some single rooms. I have no idea why this first guy wasn't in a single room, because his snoring, it's like someone chainsawing a T-Rex to death or something. It was like biblical. And
yet in delusion, sorry to interrupt, but in delusions, in the notes, I don't know if you've read this bit of the book, but the nurse does highlight to some degree a problem of this nature that you may also sometimes.
Oh yeah, I snored as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so a race to get to sleep, I imagine.
Yeah, but he always got terrible sleep.
You'd be waking them up, would you? Trying to.
So the first time I got put in seclusion was actually the nurses put me there to help me get some sleep. Why they didn't put the snorer in seclusion, I don't know. So yes, it's very dilapidated. Yep, I've covered that. And yeah, did you want me to touch upon going to design and mental health? I will say.
Yes, what you saw at the conference when you were dressed and how that compared, the worst and the best.
So it seems like we're moving in the right direction. Yeah. But there's a team from Switzerland or something, or Sweden, and they designed for seclusion rooms a huge kind of iPad thing. And one of the options you could do was you could create like a nice grassy outdoor thing. So basically, my room, so I'm in litigation with them, because I think they saw my room first. And
how interesting.
Money there. So yeah, that answers the question, doesn't it?
I mean, it does, yeah. There's, in Sweden, you're not allowed to keep a guinea pig in isolation. Something as a guinea pig owner, I follow the guinea pig stories of the world. But that doesn't surprise me then, the Swedish people.
I think the keyboard about it is Talk with Tamika. Is towards the end, I was with a trainee doctor and I was depressed, and I said, well, what would you do to Bosworth Ward?
Yeah.
And she was a trainee doctor, and she said, I'd tear it down.
I mean, that says it all. It's easy to just accept what we're presented with. That's the offer, especially if it's from an institution that is so highly respected and regarded like the NHS. But we forget that there are these limitations, and clinicians and people who want to do good are sometimes having to do good in difficult circumstances and just with the best that is available, which is often not enough. And so I applaud Tamika's honesty there, and I would concur with it in many cases at least. You've touched on a number of problems so far. We've begun to highlight some problems with mental health detention. There are problems in the context of the clinical treatment, I suppose, in the inpatient environments, but also the design and some of these older designed spaces. And there are potentially unnecessary curtailing of freedoms as well. And I suppose I'm thinking around some broad areas like dormitories and other private and communal spaces that we have started to touch upon already with the snorers and so forth. Smoking is another area you highlight in Delusions of Grandeur. Spaces being closed after a certain time, for example, the outside at night. Showers is another one you highlight. And then you talk about gender inequality and use the experience of moving from a mixed ward to an all-male ward around the time when wards were going single sex. And the very differences you experience, negatively, the male ward being cold and hard compared to the mixed ward, having more of a homely woman's touch, as you say. But you're homely, it's softer in some way, more, an easier place to be. I wonder if you might like to discuss, pick up on any of these points. Perhaps to begin with, as you've talked about dormitories a little, maybe dormitories, but also the gender inequalities of spaces. Should there be complete equality across male and female spaces?
I mean, just the thing I got was on the female ward, on the mixed ward. I wasn't on an all-female ward. At the time, that would have been very problematic. But it was like the garden was nicer, and also there was the nurses were more lenient. So there was this. If it was, you couldn't go in the garden after 12 to smoke. But if the right nurse was on, you go, oh, can I have a cheeky fag? And she'd let you out and let you back in. Whereas on the male ward, when I got put on the all-male ward, the times were a lot stricter. It was a lot. It was actually a new garden that had just been built, which was just this grass and the walls, very high walls that you can see over. And the male ward really kind of, for me, underlined that you're in an institution, that it's a bit like jail.
And I think my point here would be is that there shouldn't ultimately be any gender inequality between the fitness for purpose of one environment versus the other. I think it's worth picking up that when you are in a depressed state or in a point of crisis, the built environment has a much bigger impact on you than generally would be. So there's a real importance to the kind of the design that's actually created and what messages it sends. You know, you're talking about your contrast between the mixed
worth
ward.
as much suddenly.
Exactly, and you start questioning that in a kind of very extreme way. And you know, we often talk about the safety or risk reduction that we apply in mental health environments, and there's sometimes perhaps an obsession with risk reduction at all costs. And I think it's something that we need to navigate much more considered, much more careful way, but making sure that we always think about what are the impact of the decisions we're taking. So, for example, some people will say it's not appropriate to have plants around, or not appropriate to have soft soil because people can conceal things. Let's just put a concrete slab down, and you know, there's no risk with concrete.
What is the risk instead? That, to someone's recovery and hope.
Exactly. What's the knock-on effect? How long will they have to be in this environment rather than getting back home? You know, because they're not getting better. And there's all sorts of things like that. So this zero risk kind of mindset can be really dangerous.
As opposed to positive risk taking, is how you would describe it.
Is that not? I mean, like I'm arguing for it now, but
more positive risk.
But no. But I think the problem is, so I can't. So, for example, there was a bin. It was a dustbin, and they used to have plastic bags. But because someone, I think I'm using the right example here, because someone had used the plastic bag to top themselves, then suddenly the bin had a paper bag, which was, I don't know. So I feel like there's a problem there with litigation and where.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really challenging point in that there is this kind of drive, and I think it's possibly the right drive, which is it shouldn't be acceptable for someone at a vulnerable time of their life to be able to take their life. And you know, it obviously stops them recovering in a very abrupt way. But you know, how can we navigate that line between reducing risk and actually creating a supportive, caring environment? And I think that's ultimately what good design has to be about, is creating spaces which love and care the individual and inspire getting better.
Yes, yeah.
You know, there's a charity called Hospital Rooms, and they're incredible. They're all about patient involvement, people lived experience being involved in creating amazing art spaces within mental health, and they bring along, you know, people at the top of their game in the art world. But they came through their journey into mental health environments similar to ourselves, in that it was based on a friend going in and being sectioned and just thinking, this is not a space to inspire recovery, this is not a place to inspire getting better. And so I think, back to the original question, which is there this inequality? There probably is in many different environments. It might not be gender related, but ultimately what we need to do is invest and make the mental health spaces better. And I think that fundamentally has to be done with the voice of people with lived experience.
Yeah.
You know, we cannot make these spaces better unless we involve the people who actually know what the design decisions feel like.
It's very reassuring to hear you say that. I mean, one question I haven't listed because I thought there were so many questions we're not going to have time, but it was to what degree do you involve service users and consult with them? And I also thought it might be a bit risky because we've not met before today, and I you know, for all I knew, you could be some hard-nosed tycoon, you know, raking it in from the world of mental health design. But it's very different, isn't it? I mean, I can say that now openly because we can see it's not the case. But hopefully. But it's not, is it? You're clearly motivated by personal experience, wanting to make things better, and you know, you are drawing on service user viewpoints, and you are consulting, and that's what the framework you're part of is all about too. And that's why you're here. Here's a case in point.
Yeah, and I would add to that I don't think we've got it completely right in actual application, otherwise our organisation would need to exist. So I think the very fact that Designer Mental Health Network exists is a sign that there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Well, there's so much interaction as well. I don't know about what people think here, but the interface between the clinical care and the space in which that clinical care is delivered. You know, so you can have the best space, you know, designed in the most light-filled, wonderfully open, with privacy and everything. But if the nurse goes around and locks all the doors and says, you know, the patients can't have the books because they might eat them, then it's, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, there's got to be a kind of a work in progress negotiation between these two aspects, you know, the clinical care and the space which that care takes place within. If we move on to maybe another of these issues that we've highlighted, you've highlighted in your work, smoking is something that you touch upon. Well, did you have another point?
Well, actually, no. Yeah, I do have a
yeah.
So I don't actually talk about it specifically in the exhibition. I talk about smoking a lot in the text panels in the book. I talk about smoking a lot. But what has happened since I left was there's been this smoking ban, which means you can't smoke in the grounds of a hospital. Now, I think when applied to mental health care, this is madness because, okay, if you're someone like me who was very in people's faces and a flight risk, I got put in and you're ward bound for at least 2 weeks. Now, I was smoking at the time, and what that meant was there's a little garden in your ward, and what that meant is I could smoke in the garden in my ward. But if I'm ward bound, at the very best what I might get is a nurse taking me out once a day to smoke outside, and I feel like we might have a nurse on the front row. No? Oh, okay.
Let's check each row.
Anyway.
Such a bad idea.
Sorry. So to me, this new smoking ban seems like to apply it to mental health. The mental health gardens is madness because we all know, well, I haven't got any statistics to prove this, but we all instinctively know that smoking and mental health are related. Probably there are statistics saying people who are bonkers are more likely to smoke. Sorry for using the B word there, but and so you're putting someone in a sectioned area, and if they're like me, they go for the first 2 weeks they can't get out to smoke. That just seems dangerous to me because people are much more likely to kick off if they haven't.
It's a very stressful thing to give up, and if you're forced to give up, even more stressful. And I can see how it would lead to more resentment at a time when you're trying to sort of create more compliance.
Is there an answer to this?
What do you think? What do you think about smoking and mental health prevention?
I'm a former smoker, just for declaration. To me, I think the reality is when somebody is sectioned, their whole world is turned upside down. Like they don't know what's going on. And so actually what we should be doing is trying to make that journey as calm and as, you know, non-distressful, unstressful as possible, to choose the right word. So I think there's kind of elements there of why is smoking such an importance? Like if that might be the one bit of transition where you've got your before and after, where you've got some consistency of, you know, I can still do this, then why not?
Yeah.
I think this comes back to the question of how does the NHS manage risk? And so is it a kind of case of somebody somewhere used a cigarette in an inappropriate way and caused some harm to somebody or to themselves, and we'll just give a blanket ban to everybody. And I don't know if that's the reality of it.
Isn't it just the smoke? There's a national smoking ban now in indoor spaces, and certainly indoors. I mean, when I was sectioned 20 years ago, and at that time there were smoking rooms. I don't know if you remember or if you were spent any time at Her Majesty's, you know, at that time, mental health
We
time.
did have smoking rooms.
Right, so you remember smoking rooms too?
Well, Rob mentioned them last week.
Right, okay. Well, at the time, I mean, I'm not now. I have dabbled with smoking in the past, but I wasn't a smoker then. But I was, balmy, to use another B word. I think we can use some of these words as a way of reclaiming them, I think, especially if we have experience of such matters. And I would go and sit in the smoking room just because I had no judgment and just like passively consume like 1,000 cigarettes in half an hour and just chat to the smokers because they seem cooler than the other people because I wasn't seeing things, you know, clearly. I mean, clearly, maybe they are. You informed me at the time, Dave.
I was definitely cooler.
Cooler, I can tell. That's what I was reaching towards. But yeah, so I can see the pros and cons because I can see how giving up smoking, a stressful thing to give up at a stressful time. It's not ideal, is it? Being made to do something against your will. It sounds like another unnecessary curtailing of freedoms. And at the same time, giving people access to something that they can do unlimited access to something that is harmful when the person doesn't have their full faculties and doesn't have, you know, isn't in possession of full judgment, could also be untherapeutic. So I can see why smoking rooms closed.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, you get cancer when the door opened, you know, blowing into the ward, you know, to the backdraft. Going off the ward, I think in an ideal world, maybe this is another interface between the clinical treatment and the physical design, because how can we can't build smoking huts,
I know what we have to do.
Right.
I've got the answer.
Does it link?
It's not a design thing, but the blanket smoking ban, we just let people smoke in the gardens. If they're in the mental health unit,
having an outdoor space,
they can smoke, so it shouldn't apply to
and then it's
mental
private,
health.
Absolutely, it's safe. I mean, it's safe in that way. You can't just...
I'm tempted of trying to start a petition or something, because...
I mean, I know a lot of NHS staff are very, very very against the smoking ban. In part because there's a lot of the population of the NHS staff that actually smoke themselves. So they're very conflicted when they're trying to implement a ban, and yet, meanwhile, they're at their break and having a cigarette. So I think it's actually very difficult for the staff in question as well. And there is a solution. Just make an outdoor space which is safe, comfortable, people can access.
You don't have to make them. It's already there.
Exactly. Exactly. Just get the access.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, something to do with the cultures of care and
let's start one of those petitions things that they do to the government that you get on Facebook. Maybe I would start that.
That's the next thing, clearly.
Obviously, it will get nowhere in government, but
well, they've got a few things.
I don't think this is going to change though. Like I did it. I talked about this in Design Mental Health, which was a great experience, and everyone said, "Yeah, it's madness, it's crazy." I don't think it's going to change.
Well, change starts with people talking about it and raising it as an issue. This is an unseen, unheard, untold story, really, by and large, and not enough people discuss it. I mean, if we leave smoking for a moment, you know, you use humour in general to explore a range of very serious topics, from severe mental illness and recovery to freedoms and civil liberties. And you touch upon smoking in this regard. Another subject you highlight, and I don't know how many people would have seen this so far going around, but is what you refer to somewhat euphemistically as relaxing in the gentlemanly fashion. Could you talk a bit more about this in the context of mental health detention, just to boundary it a little bit? Yes.
Wanking.
Yes.
So yes, basically, trying to knock one off when you're under section is a tricky thing. I mean, if you've read the board, I'd imagine it might be the first board you'd go to if you go in there. But it's problematic because I think everyone does it in the showers in the morning. Because after that, okay, I'm going to be a little bit serious now, but like under section, all intimacy is removed. you know. When your mum gives you a hug like you nearly explode, you know. And so the one last intimacy we have surely is with ourselves, and it's really problematic because, like, I was on 15-minute observations, so I was disturbed on numerous occasions. By the way, a little bit in my defence, bipolar sends your libido through the roof, where it did with me. So I was always keen to get at it. And so you're disturbed, and they take away your laptop, your phone. So there's no men of it. Well, I am, at least I'm very visually orientated. So there's nothing. And what I did, it was all in the board, but what I did, well, there were some quite sexy student doctors and nurses. So you end up oh, we might have one in the audience.
She's made a special trip.
I'm sorry, but this is all true. You end up fantasising about the people who are trying to look after you and give you your medication, and that's not healthy.
But then we all, well, no, okay, that's a secondary point you make, maybe in that context.
So, I mean, I'm just repeating the board now. This is just a funny little story. Towards the end, I was released more. You get released more, so you can spend 4 hours at home or something.
Oh, this is hilarious.
So I thought I'm going to go really 80s and get myself an art pamphlet, pornography from a corner shop. And I went in, and immediately I felt like I was 14, you know. And then I'll just stand up.
Really unfortunate.
And to top off that feeling 14, I couldn't reach the porn. So I had to get the woman behind the counter to get it down for me. And in the board I say, like, now I'm getting serious again, but I say, like, getting sectioned is a series of being humbled. Like, your freedom, well, that's gone. Being told to get up and go to bed.
When you can make a cup of tea, when you can have a shower, when you can leave the space, when you can go outside.
And, you know, and that was degrading and humbling. Okay, it was partly my own little story, because I'm sure other people have gone and bought porn, but they weren't as short as me. So, yes, but I don't know.
Maybe we could feed back to the corner shops of the world as well, that maybe they should just consider a step.
Yeah, a little step.
Just a small step. It's a small step as well, isn't it? And it would just transform so much.
Little wanker step.
Should it be labelled? Should it have a little sign on it? That's maybe just, because it could be multi-purpose, I think. Yeah, okay. There are other things, I mean, you use humour so brilliantly, and yet it is a serious subject. Well, I'm guilty, actually. When I first read that passage, I was like, oh my God, Dave. Wanking. You've got a chapter called "Everyone Wanks in the Showers," and wanking sits under the wanking chapter. And I initially sort of snore, is this necessary? This is a bit gratuitous. And then I think for a moment, and I think it's such a serious subject. Because it's a human right, and it's about identity and dignity, and a relationship with oneself. And recovery is all about your relationship with yourself. Well, there's so much research and evidence that suggests that masturbation is good for reducing stress. It's a way of comforting oneself. It's a way of helping yourself sleep. It boosts your immune system. It actually boosts your immunity. So go forth, everybody, and be well, with our blessing at the NHS. But not if you're meant to be detained under a section of the Mental Health Act. So where do you stand on the subject, Phil?
Have I ever been asked that question before?
I think, is there a design answer to
this? Yes.
I can't enable
this.
And without kind of layering too much or putting too much pressure on the designers, there always has to be a design solution. I think this kind of fundamentally boils down to, you talk about observation every 15 minutes, actually.
Privacy, yeah.
Privacy,
How
actually, this is where this
design
comes down to.
Privacy.
And again, Actually, now they do observations randomised. So rather than being
You can't even
predictable every
plan.
15 minutes, you
Yeah.
can't even plan.
Mm.
Right, I've got 12 minutes, go quick. So the kind of reality is how do you kind of navigate people's dignity, people's
Yeah.
time, their respect?
Like you have to go to the toilet, that kind
Well,
of thing. Like it'd be furtive, like
I
it's
think there's
dirty.
actually sometimes simpler steps that we can take it. And would you walk into somebody's office or somebody's room without knocking?
No.
But yet we do it in mental health. We observe people without any kind of
highlight
willingness for the
that,
person
yeah.
behind there to be aware. So knock and then look.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that would be applicable in general sense and general kind of day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Why is it not applicable?
Otherwise,
in
we're
mental health?
dehumanising, aren't we?
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
and again, this is the opposite of recovery. You know, identity, humanity.
Privacy is a really key ingredient to recovery. We need our own
Yeah.
space to kind of clear our head, get our thoughts together, and so on and so on. So privacy is a requirement, it has to be in there. It's a kind of question of how do we navigate that alongside observations to make sure people are safe and cared for. So I think it's not as complex a challenge as it sometimes gets dressed up to be. I think there's some basic principles that we can employ that would improve the dignity of people within these spaces.
But it needs to be on the agenda, doesn't it?
Not in the design, so it's not a wanking room. With some,
I can see some challenges.
Some
I mean, I think it
shame.
would still become quite
Nice
public then,
comfortable
surely,
chair.
because when you when you made your way to the wanking hut.
And also when there's a queue outside
And-
as well. And then you'd have to ask someone for permission for the key to the wanking room.
Yeah.
And there would be hygiene
Yeah,
considerations that I'm
there's all
sure
sorts
could be
of
dealt
things
with.
that
I mean,
Interesting.
I'm only See, I think especially with this issue, I'm highlighting, but I don't really have the.
Yes,
I mean,
we don't have the
the
solution
one thing
yet.
I would say is I think it's about, for me, it's about nurses. It's not. It's about a nurse. What's the right word I mean? A
Well,
nurse's
yeah,
discretion.
Yes.
And nurses, which I kind of highlight as I think we need to make sure a nurse can act with discretion, maybe break the rules a little bit,
Be
but they might
flexible.
be there at the door when they're supposed to do their random check, and they might go, I'm pretty sure Dave's wanking. I'll leave that. I'll be back in 5 minutes or something.
Just walking to Dave's door now.
But, well, I got so frustrated, this is all in the board, but I got so frustrated, I'd go to my
announced it,
bedroom
yeah.
and say, I'm going to my bedroom, I will either be snoozing, reading my book about Buddha, or masturbating.
It's all the
I
same,
shall not
really.
be
Yeah.
disturbed, because I was bipolar, so
But negating your own privacy, having to do that as
Yeah.
a measure to try and get some. So I think this general point: how can we ensure privacy is respected and created and maintained then by the clinical care, because it's an interface again. It could just be the solution could just be a simple matter of knocking, and respecting dignity.
I do think there are a lot of things that can be solved actually with giving. This goes back to smoking actually.
Yeah.
So I visited some friends after the smoking ban who'd gone back inside, and on one of the wards, a nurse went, I tell you what, go outside, and you can have a quick cigarette. But if that nurse was seen by a particularly strict matron, that nurse is now breaking the rules. And so I feel we need to give nurses more power within, I highlight at some point a nurse wouldn't give me drooling drugs. Drugs to stop my drooling, because she'd given me one an hour ago and I would be overdosing. And what was essentially quells, so that's an idea of a nurse
But not using their discretion,
No.
sticking to the
Yeah.
letter of things. So I think some just flexibility around and common sense somehow.
Yeah.
And I think maybe just establishing more of a culture, a gentle culture perhaps, gentle step towards, but of positive risk taking. Because risk is there in whatever case. What is the risk of not giving the quells, and giving the actually more severe medication that will lead to the drooling. So you break, you fit in with one rule, but then you break another. Or you undermine the care in another way. So I think variation, and that's a point that you seem to return to a lot in the book, and it seems that we can all sort of be in agreement about. I mean, moving on to the subject of seclusion, I'm aware of time, this is a big one, so I want to make sure we get this in. People, I think, may or may not know, but seclusion is a tool used by mental health clinicians where a patient is placed in solitary confinement in a safe, low stimuli environment to manage aggressive and disturbed behaviour that may be arising as a result of their condition. In Delusions of Grandeur, in one of your happier voluntary, you mentioned encounters where you're put in the room because of the aggressive snorer, you nonetheless describe it as the kind of place you could happily rip your eyeballs out. It doesn't sound like you had a particularly pleasant experience, positive, shall we say, experience of seclusion. And you did that is a kind of perspective that you share from a both personal and observed perspective throughout the book of seclusion and its use. In Seclusion Part 1 of the book, you then draw up a blueprint for a better kind of seclusion space that we can see out there physically, and you can see the drawing, the actual blueprint on the outside of it, that you labelled the missing seclusion pick, which I think is so beautiful. You've talked a bit about your experience of seclusion. Could you very briefly summarise it and then describe this alternate version and vision?
Yeah, I mean, for me, okay, I was being aggressive because someone tried to take the guitar off me because they didn't have enough nurses to watch me, so I had to give the guitar, and I hung on to this guitar. So I was put in there because I was a bit violent. I understand sometimes like a room with no stimuli might be right for someone who's having a extreme suggestible psychotic state, but that wasn't me. And also I found in my worst moments, the last thing I want to be is alone with my brain. You know, especially like actually in the modern world we live in, with our phones and everything. I mean, this happened to me. I took a friend to A&E, and I was just waiting, and there wasn't any, and I had no book or anything. And so in the real world, being left with your own brain is pretty. So so this idea of no stimuli, I think this one size fits all doesn't really work. It certainly wasn't applicable to me. So what I did, it's in the board, but they take everything off you, you know, your belt. So I managed to find a pen lid in my pocket, and I used the kind of the cardboard toilet seat thing they give you, which is like a big area where you can squat and some other areas. So I used that, and I played a game of potty pen lid netball, but there
Who's laughing now?
Yeah, I was calming myself down with a very low level stimuli thing that I'd kind of invented. So, you know, like a game of Tetris would be nice, you know. So, yeah, I think that kind of sums it up.
And I know the perspective, you know, the argument is that anything else would be dangerous in the room, and there's culture against the positive risk taking. But we know in Sweden now they've got massive widescreen tellies and touch screens that are presumably okay and not going to, you know, cause any undue harm or to the patient or be easily broken by someone who might be in there for violent, aggressive behaviour. I mean, what do you think, Philip? What do you make of the seclusion vision, the room that Dave has drawn?
I absolutely love it.
Did it work?
Seclusion is a topic that is one that we're actively working on in design and mental health. There's a research project going on for actually what is it, why is it needed. I think actually where the research kind of points towards, and Paula on our board is doing a lot of work on this, but her point is you actually, for understanding the use of seclusion, you need to kind of take a big step back and understand the complete ecosystem of the ward. Like seclusion as a tool actually starts many steps back. It's because there's an inequilibrium or something's not quite balanced, and this builds up to the point of aggression and things happening that then people then feel the need for the safety of yourself and for others, I'm going to put you in solitary confinement. I have been in a seclusion room. Someone suggested to me, go in, just kind of experience it and get locked inside. And I was in for 5 minutes and I found it absolutely, it was terrifying. So the thought of that being used as a tool when someone's at a really vulnerable moment of their life, again I come back to the person probably needs a bit of love and care, something to kind of occupy themselves, take their mind off wherever they're at, rather than kind of like being forced to focus on just the one thing that's really troubling you. So I don't think we've really got it right, and I think this is one of those examples where there's a complete lack of empathy for what the person's actually experiencing. So
how would you feel in this space if it was you or if it was a relative? This is a question I think we should be asking more.
Exactly. So this kind of really inspirational space of actually some scenes of nature, like the painted clouds, the sounds that are kind of there in the background. I think all of that can be achieved within the realms of what is quote mark safe, and that kind of NHS world, but still a much kind of calming, soothing space that we can be in. So I celebrate. This is exactly the sort of thing where I think the co-production ideas and co-production of creating better mental health spaces is really, really important. Yeah. Because people who haven't got lived experience won't really ever understand what it's like. So we need to make sure that we're working with people who do.
Oh, it's just wonderful to hear, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think I've been in existing mental health seclusion environments in the room, and it's I would probably describe it as traumatic. And I think this is by contrast something that I could see, actually if I was in a really distressed space, that might actually help me. I can understand it from a design point of view, so.
The old stars.
No.
That one. Sorry, I thought
I'm pointing next door because
full circle. I'd like to conclude.
David's room's literally next door, so I have a bad habit of pointing.
I wondered if it could be like, if we did it, we're always going to maybe we will always need a space to contain that is maybe arguably a better alternative to a chemical, restraining of someone. But what if it wasn't called a seclusion room? We talked about this in the car, we travelled together, and what if it was called like a chill out space, but maybe it was accessible for anyone at any time. So it didn't have that sense of being punitive, like, oh, you've been naughty, now we're going to throw you into the room. And actually, because even if it was a nicer space with the clouds and the Play-Doh and all of this, I think if I was put in that space, but it was still the punishment room ultimately, I might resent those things and get even more angry, especially with the Play-Doh and the children's books, and start eating it or something. But that may just be me. But if it was a space that you could be in at any time to chill out, but then if someone was in it and it was needed, that person had to come out and the person who needed to go into seclusion or the chill out room went in, then maybe it would be perceived differently. But I don't know, that's just my unasked for contribution I felt compelled to say. We are probably near the end. Oh no, this is the end, to misquote the Doors. We've got a minute. I wanted to ask too many things. I wanted to ask what our favourite bits of the book were, but I also wanted to see if the audience might have any thoughts, because that was a very good idea, Colin. I think he suggested that at the beginning. You're probably burning up with questions, aren't you? What do you think, David? What would you rather do? Shall we have a couple of questions from the audience, like question time? Like being on telly. It is a bit like being on telly. Look, the cameras. But to the back of your head. The back of your head. We won't have a microphone coming round. Okay, any hands? Anyone want to ask something? Yes, please.
I couldn't agree more with the need for taking, whether it's in the mental health world or just generally in the outside world, for want of a better phrase, of just calculated risks. Yeah. Because I'm not a nurse, I am a teacher, and what worries me is, like you say, that the knee-jerk reaction to removing that plastic bag because one person took their life, that everybody, that is happening a lot of the time in schools, and it's like, so that nobody, the other children in a school of 300 children had to hide scissors because one child
but only
was behaving
presumably
inappropriately, not doing damage, but it then that children are either seem to be frightened and then they to just do normal things but take a sensible risk.
Yeah, I think so. And also, it sounds too fragmented, because if one school, if there's a real example of your school, changes their entire policy and scissors are removed because an incident has happened there, that's not national policy. You haven't got scissors being removed from every other school. So how is it going to fit the needs of those children if it's not something that's meant to fit the needs of others? And it hasn't been researched, and it's not evidence-based. And the same thing, I thought that exactly when you mentioned the plastic bag replaced with the paper one. That's been done on that ward. That's not national policy. And so, but it could be, and then what is the evidence base? Is it one case? Is it two cases? And what do we think of all the other times that's not happened? And is there another way of managing that risk? Yeah, great points. But this idea of calculated risk, positive risk taking, and how we can do that to empower and support recovery rather than limit it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
To me, throughout all of this, it seems that there's a sort of a mindset that's been established from the top down that patients are kind of insane until proven sane, and does that then create a system that removes trust from, as you were saying, from nurses to act with discretion, that if they can trust certain patients and say, I trust David not to hurt himself or others with this guitar, I trust this patient to go and have a cigarette. Once you start removing that trust, it takes away a fundamental principle, I think, that everyone sort of wants to feel like a person, and then it feeds into the design, it feeds into all the rules. If there is a culture where you fundamentally don't trust the people that are in your care, to me it seems like there's no way that person will ever recover. Is that just my sort of wrong interpretation, or do you think that there is an aspect of that?
Yeah, I think it's, as I said, I think like a big thing is maybe giving the nurses more power to act with discretion of what, to be able to gauge a risk and go, oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it's tricky because people are people as well, and you might, like when I got put in seclusion, I said, when I was trying to calm down, I said, oh, can I have a book then? And the nurse wouldn't give me one. And there was no way though that, he didn't give me one because he'd think I was going to cut my...
That was about something else.
It was about me pissing him off a bit.
Yeah.
So it's really
and that's another
tricky.
critique of seclusion.
I mean,
it can be
that
used as a tool, coercive control. And
I think that taps into a whole topic of unintended power dynamics. It's a simple thing like, does somebody have the ability to unlock their own bedroom door or not? And in most cases, people don't. So they either have to leave the room unlocked so they can get back in at any point, or they have to go and get a staff member to lock it and unlock it.
It's very infantilising.
I mean, it's like being a 5-year-old kid again, asking for the key to go to the toilet. And there's all sorts of examples like that. But coming back to your point about, do we assume that there is, do we have a system which basically assumes everybody's guilty? I think one of the kind of realities is there are people within these spaces who are actually of harm to themselves, and some will be, self-declaring that point and needing a space which can keep them safe. I just think that there has to be a pursuit of ensuring that we kind of provide safe spaces that doesn't undermine this person's self-worth. And I think it's a tough design challenge, but I don't think it's an impossible one. So I think we should keep on pursuing that, like what is better, and making sure that we walk that kind of tightrope, because I sympathise with people within the NHS in that they are given a really tough job of, you can't allow somebody to harm themselves in your care, but yet use positive risk taking, or these things contradict each other. So how do we actually support them better to basically take those risks? I never forget a story from James, who spoke at our conference last year, and he spoke about a time where he was really, really struggling in a mental health ward, and he was just like speaking to the nurse and just begging, saying, I just really need a bath, I need to kind of calm down a little bit. And in the end she was like, right, okay, there's not enough staff members so I can't observe you in there, just going to promise me you won't kill yourself? And that's the sort of engaged conversation, but actually is that not the right sort of conversation, is to have that discretion, give the clinical teams an agency to say, do you know what, we've had a conversation, I understand the relationship here, actually go and have a bath, but please don't top yourself, as you would say.
Yeah.
Can I just say, actually, that nurse who didn't know was actually one of my favourite nurses.
Oh, really?
They were actually a really nice.
You described that very well, though, in the book. But I think it's very generous.
Yeah, that he's been very kind to me in the past, and he was lovely in a lot of ways. But this day I just pissed him off because I shouted for half an hour at the top of my voice. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe there should be like a part of their learning of being positive risk taking and discretion.
Yeah. I mean, it's 3:05. I think we could carry on all afternoon, really, couldn't we? And there may well be energy for further questions because it's such a big subject, isn't it? But shall we say? I don't know. Shall we say one? How do you?
Well, we don't know if there's one more question yet.
There might not even be one more question. Yeah. Do you think we should ask Colin, Dave, at the back?
Have you got a question?
I'm saving my questions obviously till I'm on this panel in a few weeks' time. What I reckon is the solution is we draw stumps, but if you guys are happy to stay, and then people can come.
Why don't we have it? We'll be relaxed and have
people a chance.
circulation.
One of the things I'm conscious of is that a lot of this stuff has been really deep and perhaps challenging. So I do encourage you to sort of debrief by talking to those you came with or those you met today, and also use this space and go in. Some of you haven't seen it yet. Experience that seclusion room as a way of just coming down a bit. Form an orderly queue if you have to, but or stay here for more of the same. But I think it's a good time to sort of draw a line and say thank you so much for all the rich content, and I'm sure that will form the basis of many future discussions. Thanks again to all the panel, and thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.